You think you know me?
This is Infants on Thrones, philosophy mingled with science.
I've been thinking about the concept of theory versus mechanics, and you know, when we're talking about ideas and we're talking about theories and beliefs, I've just noticed that as I've been trying to be really present with people that I'm talking about things that matter, is trying to be really conscious of the language that's used and what people are saying, and really trying to be engaged with what people are trying to communicate. And as I've been doing that I've been almost becoming a little more and more frustrated is not the right word, but it's close. Frustrated in conversations, because the more I've been trying to connect and trying to be present with people by trying to understand what they're saying, I'm feeling more and more disconnected.
Really? Because you would think that it'd be the other way around.
I would, and I've been seeing the opposite. Is I'll give you specifics. Is just a quick example. A friend was saying, I'm starting to kind of explore mysticism. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me what you mean by mysticism. And they kind of drew a blank, and we're like, well, I don't really know. And I was like, well, I mean, I dig mystical stuff, kind of those concepts, and do you mean spiritual? Do you mean religious? Do you mean? And they're like, no. And all of a sudden, the conversation just kind of stopped. There was a roadblock, kind of, because we weren't really able to, as we were trying to zero in on what the meaning of that was. It was just, well, I guess I don't really know. And then we kind of moved on to another topic, and I was like, oh shit, I was kind of interested in what you had to say about that. And in that same conversation, this person kind of mentioned about, something about the goddess within. I said, well, you just said something about the goddess within. That seems pretty mystical. What do you mean by that? I mean, what are you saying when you're communicating that? She's like, I don't really know. It's just something people say. I was like, oh shit. Okay. And then I said, well, I mean, do you have a concept of God? And they're like, not really. I was like, fuck. And it just, as we were getting kind of to topics that I thought were going somewhere and kind of interesting, it was clear that our definition, it's not even our definitions, is this particular person was just using words that other people had used, and were kind of adopting them and using shortcuts. And I was thinking, as I was, very engaged, and I was very interested in what this person had to say about some of these topics. And then I felt a little bad. Like, did I pressure too much? Did it feel like I was, kind of cross-examining, or what do you mean by that? And did that shut it down? Or was it now getting into a place where it was so personal that they didn't want to really share and really want to dig down, and instead was just kind of relying on these shortcut concepts and just these assumptions that her concept of mysticism and my concept of mysticism is shared. And that's happened. That's just an example that happened about to 4 or 5 different in 4 or 5 different conversations over this last week, as I was really trying to understand the concept of words that that sometimes are really vague. And it was always kind of around the what I'm going to say are the theories, the the ineffable concepts like God, spirituality, life approaches, psychology, these types of things. It was always there, and are the things I consider, particularly important, particularly, meaningful. Right, the getting into the purpose of life and the meaning of life, and kind of those kind of concepts.
But do you think that's might be because some of these people that you're talking to might not have worked it out, figured it out for themselves, found out what the definitions of how they define topics and subjects and words are?
For sure. And I know they hadn't spent the time that I had. That sounds so fucking condescending, but
they haven't leveled up like I have.
Yeah, no, really. I spent 7 years talking with you jackoffs about these concepts, and you guys always pushed, and so we've been doing that, and just in although all these people had came from a fairly strict religious upbringing like we did, and so I just assumed that they no longer identified as religious, so I assumed that there was kind of the similar approach of deconstructing or deconstructing beliefs and concepts like God and that. But then, and so, I think that's definitely the case. But then, and actually, Chris and I were kind of talking about that, and I got a little frustrated. I was like, yeah, but they're the ones that introduced the topic. They were the ones that were kind of talking about these ineffable concepts, and specifically talking about, wanting to, being interested in exploring, some of these.
Probably because they're used to talking about these topics and subjects with other people who haven't processed it for themselves.
I think that's right. And
surface level stuff. Well,
and just assume, these assumptions that there is a shared meaning when you say the term, whatever, and God or whatever. So I think you're right. And
I also think I think we're used to assuming everyone's talking about the same thing, so we just talk around and everyone talks. But now you and I are really trying to make sure the person that we're communicating with, like especially you and I are doing that. Let's make sure we're talking about the same. We both are talking about the same thing, so we can actually talk about it. And I don't think we used to do that as much. And now we really want to talk to somebody about something. We really do we want to know, are we?
Yeah, you want to get on the same page, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you're understanding.
And you can talk in depth with it and really talk about how it affects you. But if it's like the whole mysticism thing, we could have talked about things we do, we've heard and buzzwords, but we wouldn't have had a conversation with her.
Right. We would have
just been about, stuff.
Yeah, it would have been
wanted to talk about it.
It'd have been these vague terms with both of us living in our own universe, being like, yeah, no, that's totally interesting. Isn't that how it is? And walked away really without any shared understanding.
And it's not that it wasn't, because I was there when Matt was talking to this person.
We were talking. It wasn't like I was having a conversation. Chris is sitting there watching me. What are you guys talking about?
And it's not like Matt or I were like, well, what do you mean by that? So, because we need to make sure you're talking about what we mean by that. We just, I wanted to ask her a few questions, but I needed to know what I wanted to make sure she was talking about the same thing that I was thinking of as the topic. And it so clearly wasn't that I was like, oh, I would have been talking about mysticism, what I think, and she would have been talking about, activities.
Yeah.
And we would have, we could have even agreed on things, but we would have left not even talking about the same thing. So that conversation would have been meaningless.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, oh, we could, yeah.
So it made me start to think about, theory versus mechanics, and which really, for me is like, what are the givens that we're operating under? What's the framework here? Again, another friend, we were starting to get to a topic, and then this one person just about 4 or 5 different times would say, well, we don't really know. Everything's just really complicated. I was like, well, is that true? I mean, there's things we know, it's just to dismiss and kind of throw up our hands and say, well, it's just a lot. It's just a lot. It's just complicated. Well, let's talk about maybe some of those factors, and so I'm interested in the mechanics of those factors. What's a lot? What are the things that go into, I think we were talking about kids, for example. Kids are challenging, and it can be hard, and we'll just never know. And it was like, well, no, but we do kind of. I mean, how old's the kid? What's the development? What are the other issues are in their life? What are things that we can kind of get data points, and we can get evidence, and maybe zero in, at least in understanding the world a little more, rather than just throwing up our hands and say, you know what, life's complicated, life's a bitch. What are you going to do? We're just kind of, I guess we'll never figure it out. And there was just something so frustrating is not the right word, but it was it was very disconnecting, because I wanted, I like to maybe I overanalyze or process things, and want to have as much as many of the known factors and much of the known data in order to either extend a conversation or talk about and just there just kept being this ineffableness. It's really like having a conversation, and then they say, well, it's just ineffable, which means, right, I just can't really describe it. I was like, well, maybe we shouldn't talk about it then if it's ineffable. maybe we should wait until it's more effable, right? Maybe it's more approachable, or let's talk about things that we both understand a little more.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And the concept of mechanics just again kept coming in. For me, I used to say always, well, what's the integration of that? What's the application of that? I feel like when we say, well, there's just too many inputs, we can't really know. The application of that is, well, we're never going to get to mechanics. We're never going to apply anything. And now we're in a world of, to me, that's what people mean. At least that's what I mean when you think of moral relativism. It's just you just can't know a thing, and so every conclusion is just as valuable and applicable and I don't know, valuable maybe is a good word, than any other. And that's the part I reject is I'm 100% about every individual is different, can be different, and can be different for them. So there doesn't have to be universality, but yet there can be an agreed upon set of mechanics. And I keep saying mechanics because I think of both quantum mechanics and classical mechanics kind of explicitly, which is the way that bodies move, the way that bodies interact in the environment, and the way the environment affects those bodies. Just classical mechanics is the great alchemist Sir Isaac Newton kind of started off gravitational forces. These forces exist, and then it becomes how bodies in orbit, and how the kind of the Earth. The Earth works, and there's mechanics to, nature and trees, and there's, mechanics to the body. There's mechanics to a car. This is how a car works. And you go to a mechanic because it ain't working. And I'd like this vehicle to move in space. So could you get this thing to actually work and to do the thing that it was designed to do? Right? We don't just say, well, we'll just never know. It sure is complicated. I guess we'll never figure out how that thing runs. No. We know a thing. We know that it requires fuel, and it requires electricity, and it needs to, the belts need to go here and there, and in order for the car to work. And just because you and I don't understand the mechanics of a car doesn't mean that mechanics of a car work. In fact, we accept that it does. Yeah. And was kind of having this conversation. I said, just like space, just like how the planets orbit. We know a thing. We know that the Earth is round. And then this person I was talking to kind of gave me this look like, do we? And I thought, oh shit, you're a flat earther.
Oh boy.
And I'm literally talking about mechanics, classical mechanics, to a person who just does not accept that that's reality.
Oh man, where to even go? Where to even start? What to even do?
That's the question, Tom. What do you do when you're talking to somebody you're talking to somebody and you now realize that your givens, your mechanics, your realities just aren't the same?
You kind of have to. What do you do? Do you then shift everything to try to figure that part out, or do you just eject from the conversation?
What would you do?
Well,
I'd eject. I'd get out.
So it's had me thinking, this must happen all the time with people.
Yeah.
We're having conversations. I'm talking about one thing. She or he's talking about another, and we think we're talking about the same thing. Because we do not agree on givens on a lot of different things. It's starting to be apparent, like all these conversations we're having.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions.
Are we talking to ourselves?
Yeah.
Yes, and so there's going to be disconnection between humans if we continue to interact as a species, not even talking about the same thing.
Right.
I mean, you can watch it now that I'm aware of it. You like watch politics, anything. They're like, you're arguing. You're not even agreeing that the one thing that you're arguing about really means this.
Right.
Because no, not me. So I can only assume that if we see that in fights, it's also happening then when you're just talking about fun things like your kids or teaching model, whatever, your career, anything. You have to make sure you're talking about the same thing.
So
for example, even with our kids, like Matt, something happened the other day and he was like, that's it. You can't use that anymore, Dylan. But she was like, I didn't even know that was the rule. And he was like, that's the known rule. But I was watching and I'm like, no, okay, wait, we have to make sure. Do you know how to do this, Dylan? She didn't. Okay. Now you do. Now you know what Dad and I are talking about when we're saying, do this. Next time you're going to have a consequence. But she was like, blindsided, like what? And we just assumed she knew.
Right.
I don't even remember what it was, but so it happens with our own families. Like, yes, you do. I've told you a million times. Yeah, you've told her a million times in your way. She was like, "What are you talking about? That's not how I do it." And she was about to get scolded. So it happens right in front of our own eyes with our own children because we don't communicate either exactly what I mean or take time to say, "Hey, when I say, wash it this way or do it, what do you,
That's what it was. It was stupid. We have these wood bowls, these teak bowls that I like to put my chips in. And it was in the sink with water in it. And that's a no-no. And I just assumed it was a given that she had the information that that's not how you treat those bowls. And so I said, look, you don't get to use those bowls anymore. She's like, whoa, I get it now. I won't do it. Don't take that from me. And I was like, nope. That's how it was, and you knew it. So in my reality,
because then I pulled her aside. She's like, "No, I just thought they couldn't go in the dishwasher." And I said, "Okay, yeah, because we've told you that. So now you can't." It was so silly, but we do that all the time.
And so to your point, Tom, is with this person about the flat Earth thing, I ejected, and I ejected for a couple reasons. If we can't agree on the mechanics of the Earth, for example. That means that person and I just evaluate and weigh facts and evidence completely differently.
Yeah, it says a lot, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it was such a lesson of, we are just disconnected. Our realities are disconnected, not just here, but then as we're having conversations about relationships or we're having conversations about, other things, I now wasn't sure that we were agreeing on, some very basic fundamentals. And I think this happens with words like love. These ideas that we think we understand what it means to give or show love. And so to say, hey, you just need to show love to someone. You're like, yeah, totally. You mean you need to make sure that they do what you want. That's love, right? Well, no, that's not. I don't think that's love. Think of the Tim Minchin line, which is, love without evidence is stalking. Right.
That's pretty good.
But it's like that. So when we use these big words, and really it's not these big words, it's these little words that convey very, very big and profound concepts. I'm not convinced. In fact, I should say this. I'm convinced that we're not in agreement as often as we believe that we are. Well, so let me go back to the flat earther. It would have been, I guess, really easy to just fall into, well, wait a minute, you're a flat earther? Tell me about that, and let's explore this idea. But now we're talking about theory. And so now we're saying, your theory is, all these things, Australia doesn't exist, whatever. I've very, very barely.
Yeah, but that's like a whole can of worms.
Oh, yeah, not worth it, dude. To me, it's a waste of time.
Yeah, right.
To me, that's just a waste of time. And I think we're kind of that approach, or that kind of highlights what's happening and what happens with our disconnection to whether it be politically, socially, these ideologies that we have. Right. It's about mechanics. We're here, the concept of climate change. We're arguing over what the reality is. And if one person just holds the view that because there was a rainbow this year, that means that the polar ice caps will never melt. And there are people that hold that opinion because of Noah's Ark, the story of Noah's Ark. And so if they hold that mechanical view that it is impossible for the seas to rise because a rainbow exists, well, we're just operating in such complete different realities,
right?
That it's not worthwhile spending time talking about the science, because we're not agreeing on the mechanics of environmental factors.
And what really scientifically really is.
Right. And here now it comes to, well, everybody's reality is different. We all have our own perceptions. You can never know what another person's perception is. So everybody's the same. We've all just got to just accept everybody's view and perception about things. And we just, that's just how it is. And that now is, so my friends like to say this as well, I guess we'll just never know. And so, yeah. No, I dig on that, because I absolutely hold the opinion that everybody's perception is very unique, and that we can never get inside the head of another person when it comes to a lot of their experience.
Right.
And so I don't want to do that. And that's not my intent to do that. But I do think it's critical, if we're going to have a connection, that a shared understanding and a shared experience is critical. And to that end, to say, okay, well, what are the things that we agree on that exist? I'm going to here's an analogy. Here's a little metaphor. When you're intimate with your partner, I think it matters that you have a shared intimate experience. So it's like, nice when both of you come, is what I'm saying. But if you say, you know what, my lived experience is my lived experience, I just don't know what yours is, and hope you had a good time because I know I did. But that's the way, that wouldn't work very well in an intimate relationship. If there's no concern about another person, that another person should have an experience similar to yours, I suppose. But it seems like that's what's happening more and more, as we just throw our hands up in the air and say, well, my experience is my experience, your experience is your experience, and what do we do with that?
Yeah, it's kind of like we just have to agree to disagree then. All right, so whatever, dude.
Yeah, and I think that's fine when we're talking about theory. And I think another great example is, spanking your kids or not, right? Well, I guess we'll just have to disagree, or agree to disagree. Whoa! If we're married, or if we're involved in a co-parenting situation, that's not something we can just agree to disagree on. We've got to
come to a compromise or something.
We got to come to, you can only hit them on Mondays and Wednesdays. And right. But so there are things that are there's some mechanics that, I think are necessary to agree on. And I'm happy to, when things just don't matter. For example, the concept of God, I think it's critical to be able to articulate your concept of God, because I hold the opinion your theory of God directly impacts your mechanics of life. And one example is the climate change argument. If what your belief in God is, it directly impacts the way your body bounces up against other bodies in this world. We see it certainly in a fundamentalist religious concept when, my belief is God speaks to a man who holds these opinions and takes these positions against certain individuals, then that affects the mechanics of how individuals treat that group. So your belief about God directly impacts your mechanics and the way you not just believe, but the way you interact. Mm-hmm. And that happens over and over and over again. So I say, no, that's okay. I'm happy to talk about your beliefs, or I want to talk about your beliefs because I believe it instructs, the application and the integration of those beliefs. So I want to know what your belief in God is. And so I've really been enjoying actually having these conversations, like religious, spiritual conversations with people, because, I think I've heard before the concept is it's not interesting whether you believe in God until you define what your concept of belief is and what your concept of God is. And if you can't do that, I submit, I'm suspect of a person who says, well, I don't really know, I haven't really thought about it, and it's just not something I think about. Because I do hold the opinion that that question, or answering that question, directly affects the mechanics of a person's life and the way they interact with other organisms, with other bodies, with their environment, and the way that they allow their environment to work with them. And it's especially
the way they interact with themselves.
That's a good point.
Right.
Especially when it's religious, because they have to answer to somebody else, not themselves.
Right. You're saying if someone says they believe in a God, then now they're beholden, or they've got to. You say they have to answer to someone else, and they're not. They don't
even trust themselves, especially the fundamental. They don't trust themselves as much as the God knows better, God knows more for me. So when you really want to talk about something deep with somebody, it's like I've found that even that is hard if they're so, like with my siblings. Mm-hmm. There's just these rules and you just have to go with them. So if something you want to talk about is against one of those, it's like, even if they care about it, there's this, there's God that tells me, there's rules. So you have to know all those rules if you're going to have a real conversation with somebody, because I don't have those rules in my head anymore. So that type of thing, you're not really even talking to the person if they are so fundamentally in this. I gotta see what my prophet and my God say. Right.
Oh, you trigger a memory, a conversation I had while I was standing in line with this other attorney who loves politics and always wants to engage me in politics. And so he asked me some question about politics, and I asked him, do you consider yourself a devout Mormon still? And he said, well, yeah. I said, okay, for the purpose of the conversation that we're about to have, I'm going to assume that you hold all the doctrinal positions of the current LDS church and the positions of the current prophets. Is that fair? And he was like, well, no, I don't. I said, okay, well, who am I talking to? Because I need to know when I'm talking to you,
right?
When I'm talking to your prophet. Mm-hmm. Hey, I need to know when I'm talking to you or when I'm talking to your father. Hey, I need to know when I'm talking to you or when I'm talking to Sam Harris. Because if I have a conversation with Sam Harris, cool, I will engage his ideas.
Right.
But I get a little I don't know what the fucking word is. I'm going to hit it. It's not frustrated. It's not the right word. Maybe tired. Maybe just not even annoyed. I get tired. It feels like a waste of time.
It's like a hopeless annoyance. I don't know. Is it always going to be like this? You're frustrated, but I don't know.
Well, it's exhausted. Yeah, right.
Yeah, a bit exhausted. It's like, because I'm not convinced when somebody invokes another person, well, what do you mean by that? How do you interpret what that person says? And so that's the thing I've been doing more. I guess thinking about more and more. Is what are the set of givens? What are the mechanics? And what really is the theory that you are operating under? And can you explain to me kind of those? So now we can have a really, really meaningful conversation. And in fact, and I'm not saying we have to agree and we have to share about the ideas of the theory or even the application, as long as we're in an agreement, or at least have a shared understanding of the concepts that we're talking about.
Yeah, right. Shouldn't be too much to ask.
I don't think so. And I say, I've been saying this all the time, right? Words matter, except when they don't. But if we're going to choose to use words, let's make sure we're both trying to be heard and understood and trying to understand, rather than trying to battle over finding the right word. So again, I'm not saying, well, there's a right word and there's a wrong word. No, because last night I just had a conversation with a friend. I was kind of talking about this and saying, I'm just becoming bemused. And he's like, I don't think that means what you mean. I'm like, well, what do you think it means? He's like, it means you're confused. I said, well, I mean that I'm more amused. And we looked up the definition, and it was this combination of both you're confused or perplexed. There was another one, and then it was you're amused. So there was kind of this combination of those ideas. And after kind of going through that exercise, it was a lot of fun, because now we even got to a better understanding of what both of us were both hearing and communicating. And now there was a level of intimacy because of that shared understanding, because it wasn't just, okay, now we understand. It was, this cat really does love me enough to want to make sure that he knows the emotion that I'm trying to communicate as I'm telling a story about my experience.
Yeah, which is good.
Yeah,
that's connection.
There you go.
So, what do you think? Am I misguided? Is this pedantry? Is it just?
No. This is like, to me, it's like talking about finding a way to have conversations and more meaningful conversations, meaningful connections, and what it's going to take to get there, and what it's going to take to do it.
Yeah. So, interaction Kristin and I had recently, where we just miscommunicated, and it was. And we got into a fight. We got into and we don't fight very often. We're about 23 years in marriage, in a couple months. We basically got to the point where, we finish each other's sandwiches.
Sandwiches, yeah, right.
Come on, Kristin, God damn it, I shut you up.
Yeah, this was a doozy because it was like words and
intent,
our perspective. Well, and that's why the intent mattered, because it was about words that were said,
mm-hmm.
but it was also this but that's not, we talked about, that's not what I mean, that's not what you mean. And then we said other words that were said. So we were fighting over words and how words were understood. And then we were both wrong. Like, he was not, no, you're wrong. I'm not. We just.
Let me say it. I know what it was better than you did. No.
You gotta do.
It was, I interpreted your words to mean a certain intent, that you were either chastising me or kind of belittling me, and you're saying that's not how I meant it. What I meant was this. And what I said, well, words matter, what you said, and then we really realized, well, you interpreted those words this way, so
right.
Both intent and words matter. And so, especially, and then later, the very same thing happened, except reversed, where she took my words differently, and I kind of mockingly said, well, that's not how I meant it. This was my intent, and we kind of laughed at after we calmed down a little bit, because really once you're this is where confirmation bias comes in. We're like, but this is how I heard it. Now I'm angry. And now your words now are being received this way. And now it's just this vicious cycle. But when we finally calmed down, when I finally calmed down, I apologized and said, you know what, your intent absolutely matters, because you're my Kristin. And it should be very easy for me after 23 years to assume the best of intent from you, who just demonstrated that, or that to be that type of a person. And same, for me is we should certainly assume the best of intent, but it's good to recognize that also we need to be aware and conscious of our that the words do match our intent, and be a little more careful with our delivery, especially with sensitive topics or topics which are going to be a little more raw. And that just caused me to think is, holy shit, if you and I have these types of conflicts, and we have these conflicts with our kids, where there's this disconnect, this dissonance between intent and how the words are received, how much more disconnecting is it going to be with people who we don't don't rub our genitals up against each other, or or don't live together, or maybe are a little closer to strangers, and especially those who we just tend to not like for whatever reason. It's just that much easier or more likely to have that type of disconnection. And how important it was to me not just to kind of resolve that, to have a little more resonance with other people, not a lot more resonance with other people, but particularly the people in my life, the people that I love, the people that I care about, and the people that I have to associate with.
Well, we make assumptions based on our own perspectives. And I think we do that from childhood, because as we're trying to just learn the world, we make assumptions. Yeah. And I think that's where it can be so detrimental in a conversation, because, and this is why, I really have been trying, like we were talking about with the person we were trying to get, to the same topic, because I'm trying not to make assumptions anymore of what they meant, because I work on gaining my perspective, but mine's the biggest in me. And if I assume someone's talking about something, or I assume somebody meant something with their words, I could be wrong half the time. I could be wrong a lot. And then I get angry. So I think it really is taking the assumptions out of everything. And that's why it is we either can connect and really understand each other and ask whys and what are you talking about? Or you realize, oh, we really can't talk because we're not talking about the same reality. So instead of me keep talking and making assumptions and them doing the same, it's like what you asked Tom, you either abort or you don't, or you start talking about well, then how's your dog? You can't talk about
how's the weather? The weather sure's been cool. I like I like football. You like football?
Yeah. Or you really have to be trained. I really do try. I'm trying to not make assumptions then, and really, okay, maybe they didn't mean it that way. Yeah. I'm taking it that way.
Well, when there's a lack of information, that's just normal for everybody to assume, to fill in the gaps, and that can lead into problems. But yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I talk about my dad a lot because of how far we were disconnected not long ago, and how it's all been my relaxing, my expectations for him. It really has. That's what it's been more than anything else, is giving him space to be him, rather than forcing him to approach the world from the way I see it. And in many ways, it was, I felt justified because I felt like I was forced to approach the world through his lens for so long. It's like, now you're going to see things my way, buddy. And all that created was just more dissonance.
Yeah, right.
I started adopting his religious language. It just eased his tension. It eased the dissonance that we had. And now we're kind of doing a lot of yes ands rather than, well, but let's, make sure, because we've done the work of, reconciling these concepts and coming to a place of at least a shared understanding of accepting where the other person approaches that part of their world.
Yeah, without judging and trying to control.
Right. And now you get to have your God, and I get to have my God. And now what we're talking about more is the mechanics.
Right.
Now we're talking about, what I've been saying lately, the mechanics, or love is the mechanics of spiritual theory. So we've spent, my folks and I especially have spent so much time battling over the theory that it's just not become workable. And so instead we focused on our shared mechanics, which is love. Concern for my nieces and nephews, attention and care about my brothers and my nieces and nephews, attention and care to what's going on in my folks' life, in their physical health, having that just attention. Awareness is attention. Attention is love, and having attention in their practical life is an expression of our shared spiritual theory, which seems so different, and yet the result and the expression is all too similar. I'm spending, again, a lot more time in the mechanics of spiritual theory, which is love. Now we can talk about, well, what is love? What's love got to do with it? What I was going to do all the different. I believe the children are our future.
Are you reading a playlist right now?
But seriously, because for many people, love is exclusion. Love is domination. Love is force, and love. Now we're getting into the mechanics of our spiritual theory, and that's why I think it does. It ultimately does matter. So
that's good.
Yeah. So
I hate to bail early, but I got to take a leak real bad. So
you're gonna take a leak.
Wow.
I know.
How dare you?
All right. Well, but I do want to ask a question.
I should fill in anyway.
Do you have a concept of God?
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.